Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, just as a gentle reminder, we are speaking to Qasim. Rafique is a relationship expert, is the beloved husband of our beloved sister Yasmin Mujahid, who is doing a tour of South Africa, alhamdulillah. And I pray that our sisters listen to her, they'll feel empowered, they'll become enamored with what Islam is all about, they'll feel a sense of connection, they too will leave a legacy. And do pray, inshallah, that we are able to invite Qasim to do a tour of South Africa also. So Qasim, but this one thing, as you were speaking, I was visualizing some of the things that I've been doing. Yeah. I remember some years ago, we went on a retreat.
Okay.
And at this retreat, I'm very strong about expression of that love, hugging.
Yes, yes.
So I said to them, I want each of your couples to hug each other. Hug each other. And one person was very disturbed, So you murder something, he was upset with me. Anyway, so there's one couple, they may be in the 70s. They walked and they hugged each other, and both of them came with tears. And the lady said to me afterwards, we're doing this after such a long time. And that's so important, because the reality of it all, the acid test would not be what's your public persona, is who you are at home.
Absolutely.
Where, if you got your spouse crying and making dua to Allah, say, Ya Allah, he was a wonderful person. Please forgive him. And how important, is this? So this expression, getting people involved in hugging and whatnot, and I think in the last segment you said how critical that is. So Qasim, now, in terms of, I would like you, I know I'm putting you in the spot, to just share 5 critical things with our community.
Okay.
And I'm sure, it will resonate with them.
Sure. Okay, so Bismillah. So the first thing that I would say is never shy away from getting coaching, counseling, or therapy. Because sometimes, depending on the nature of the problem, you can get it resolved with a relationship coach who can give you some tools and strategies, and then you formulate as a couple and you work on yourself, and Bismillah, things can pan out. And it puts a lot of, it re-sparks the love and connection between you.
Yeah, before you continue with that, right?
Yes.
Now, how can the audience at home, how can they connect with you?
The easiest way is I'm on social media, so they can go on to Instagram. It's just Qasim_Rafique_Scottish.
Yeah.
That's sort of like my name on Instagram, Qasim Rafique Scottish, or my website, which is qasimrafique.com. So that's all it is, and you have all the information.
What we'll do, when we finish this program, we'll share that information.
Excellent.
So that when it's screened,
it will be
you'll
there.
See that, yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay.
So number one is that, because sometimes what happens is it's a deeper issue, and so why therapy is so important for couples, and there's 2 things I'll say. It's going to be extremely deep, so I pray, inshallah, the audience will, inshallah, they'll get it. Number one, sometimes I have couples that come to me, and for years they have been having issues. And sometimes it's just a small tweak. You listen, and then sometimes what I would say is go to a doctor or a specialist and find out if there's if you're on a spectrum. For instance, have you got ADHD? Have you got undiagnosed Asperger's, where you don't know how to express your emotions? Stuff like this. So and then sometimes couples will come back a few months later, and it completely changed because they've said, it was like we took a huge weight off our shoulders within our marriage, because I realized that my husband actually is not doing this deliberately. He's actually got Asperger's. And so now they have medication or ADHD, they're on ADHD medication, and their life changes. So what I'm saying is sometimes there's small tweaks, but sometimes there's deeper rooted issues. Like, I'll give you an example where you have to go to a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, someone more. Why? Because, I'll give you an example. I was dealing with a couple. The man came to me, and the husband came to me, and he was just saying, look, I love my wife. And the only thing is that I'm sexually frustrated. She just doesn't want to be intimate at all. And it's been years now. But I just can't let her go, but it's also killing me. And I don't want to go and commit haram. I don't want to go to porn. I don't want to go to escorts and prostitutes. I don't want to do any of that. I'm a practicing man. So when I got them together and we discussed, and then eventually after a few sessions, the sister opened up and she told me that her trauma, which she'd hidden deep down inside, was that she was molested from the ages of 9 to 13 by the next door neighbor in her country. That she was basically sexually molested. And this is something that she doesn't even realize. So I had to send her to a trauma specialist to allow her to do the inner work to heal from that childhood trauma. So sometimes it's to do with deep childhood wounds. And so that's affecting our current relationship. And so this is why I'm saying the first thing to do is seek coaching, counseling, therapy, depending on the nature of the problem. The other thing that I would advise is that make sure that husbands and wives, as a couple, that you're spending quality time together. And when I say quality time, I mean time without smart tech. No iPads, laptops, smartphones. You just spend even just 10 minutes, 15 minutes a night, just connecting without any distractions. That 10, 15 minutes, if you add them up in the days and the weeks and the months, it has a huge impact. So that's another thing, is to start building into the infrastructure. Remember, don't think that having the kids, eating together, watching TV, going out, this is not quality time. This is family time that's kind of hectic and frantic. What you need is just solid time alone, husband and wife, where the wife can sort of just sit down and and the husband can sit down and just speak for 15 minutes about how's things, how's your day, how are you feeling, is there anything that I could do to sort of like make things easier for you tonight, and just sort of like have that 15 minutes yourself. That has a huge psychological shift. Rather than walking into a home, a lot of people nowadays, a lot of the women will say to me that they actually start to hyperventilate or they start to have like panic when they know that it's a time for the husband to come home. Or the same for the husband, he's like, I start to feel agitated when I know I have to go home, because when I go home, it's a frantic mess. We have no relationship, there's no communication, there's no intimacy. Everything is about the chaos of what's happening, bills, children. But that's because they haven't invested in the marriage. All they've been doing for years is investing in everyone else. Remember the pyramid scheme? That's the scheme. Islamic paradigm is this. This is how the house should be from a faith-based perspective. So I gave you before the break the other cultural perspective. The Islamic paradigm is this. After Allah and His Messenger, it's the husband-wife relationship first. Full stop. Do you want to know why? Once the husband-wife relationship is on par and it's healthy mentally and physically, and that they find sukoon and sakina in each other, everything else falls into place. Naturally, everything else falls. Everyone gets their rights. So that's why. So the other thing that I would say is quality time. The other thing I would say is do invest time in sort of like updating your knowledge when it comes to relationships. So whether that's attending a marital coaching class every year or 2 years, even once or twice, that just keeps it keeps things refreshed. The best way I describe it's like a car. If you have a car, every so often you have to go in to get, in the UK we have MOT, we have to do the maintenance, we have to check is everything running smoothly, then you get a certificate to say everything is okay, you've passed the test, your car is fit for the roads. We need to do that in our marriages. And something very interesting, in the United Kingdom, before I moved to America, I was speaking to a lot of the Jewish community and the Christian community regarding how they deal with their premarital courses and stuff like that. And they have a system in place. And when I went to America, I found out they have a system there as well, which is that by default, before they get married, they have to do a premarital course. Before their priest or rabbi even gives them a ijazah to get married, they have to do a premarital course. Then after that, every year, they have to obtain this sort of like regular contact. These are like from the faith-based groups in Christianity. But what I'm saying is that this is a really good system that we as Muslims should be having regular sort of like going to a relationship specialist to be able to touch base once in a while to refresh our communication skills, any conflict management that we're having, anything like this to sort of like refresh it. So these are some things that we should be doing.
You see, time is up, Qasim.
Okay, sorry.
No, Qasim, I must say this here, that I've done lots of interviews.
Yes.
This has been one of the best.
Allahumma barak.
No, really,
Allahumma barak.
I mean it. Because we need people like you, Qasim. We need people like you to tackle these issues. And I would recommend to all of you that you'll see his details at the end of the program to contact him for online courses. Because remember, there is hope. You've got to be hopeful. Never give up on Allah's mercy. And Allah has chosen people like him and others who are throughout the world are there to heal our communities, to heal the ummah, because the ummah is bleeding. So this is, once again, Qasim.
Thank you so much.
And I hope we're going to do a few more interviews. May Allah bless you, all of you. And remember, I like it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, I'm back. And I hope I'm not your recurring nightmare, my beloved brothers and sisters. Before we talk about this particular program, and I'm so excited, I want to thank each one of you who have given me feedback of the previous programs, how it has changed your life and you're adopting more positive attitudes. Alhamdulillah, Allah bless you. And the purpose behind these programs are many. And one of the programs is to respond to the wounds of our society, our community, and then we get experts who share with you their ideas because they are involved. They are authentic people involved in bringing people together and helping them to navigate sometimes these turbulent waters. And today I am so excited and I need to take calming tablets, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, right? And we have a guest and when he does speak about what he does, I'm sure you'll be so enamored and please make dua. We want to arrange for him to make a tour of South Africa. So it's my pleasure to welcome Brother Qasim Rafique. Qasim, welcome.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, Qasim. It's a pleasure. I'm glad you are here.
Thank you.
Okay, my first question, what brings you to South Africa?
I'm currently in South Africa on tour with my wife. I'm accompanying my wife, Yasmin Mujahid. We've been touring all of Europe. So we've just done Denmark, Norway, Sweden, moved into the UK. So we've done Manchester, Birmingham, London, and now we've come over to South Africa, alhamdulillah, where we'll be doing obviously Johannesburg, Cape Town. And then from there, we'll be moving over to, inshallah, Malaysia. And then after that, Indonesia and Singapore, inshallah.
No, jazakumullah for that. You know, I must say, you know, I've engaged with Yasmin in KL and in South Africa. She is such a positive influence, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. And Qasim, you know, I don't want to introduce you as the husband of Yasmin because you in your own right, alhamdulillah, I checked your website. You're doing beautiful things, alhamdulillah.
Thank you so much.
So, Qasim, just talk about what you do and what's your motivation.
Sure, no problem. So basically what it is that over the years, I was a police officer many years ago and for just under 10 years. And so as I was going through that channel, I started to get to a point where I felt, do you know something? This is not where I belong. And the reason I started to go down that line is because after you'd arrest someone, I'll be sitting there and I'll be counseling them. And then one day my sergeant said to me at that time, he said, Qasim, our job is really just to arrest them and put them through the system. So that got me thinking, saying that this is maybe not where I see myself retiring to. And then eventually what happened was I started to move over into the field of psychology and trying to sort of like study and understand the human condition. And then eventually I went into writing a book about marriage. My first book that I got published back in the United Kingdom before I moved over to the US was 7 Life Lessons on the Myths of Marriage. And so through that, then I got more into sort of like understanding relationships, studying relationship science, studying with some of the bigger institutes that the sort of like home in and specially focus on relationship science, like the Gottman Institute in Seattle, US. And so that's what I did. And now for years now, I have been behind the scenes just dealing with clients all over the world, from individuals to couples to even family scenarios. And so I deal everything from premarital, during the marital stage, divorces, and I also sort of like deal with a lot of addiction problems like porn addiction and drug addiction, and then infidelity. That's something that I deal a lot with now, emotional attachments outside of marriage. And so this is sort of like what I've been doing. And finally, just recently, maybe 2 years back, some of the community members where I stay in the US were saying, you really need to get this information out there to the public, as in you need to be teaching this, doing seminars. And so alhamdulillah, I launched in Canada, and the overwhelming feedback was it's a blessing from Allah. The feedback from the community was amazing. So I then went on to London, started teaching the Path to Lasting Love, which is my seminar. And then from there, just recently, it was such a success that our charity sponsors and the event organizers said, let's do Manchester, let's do Birmingham. And so alhamdulillah, so word is getting around. My style of teaching, I'm actually Scottish. So I'm born in Wales, UK, raised in Scotland. And if anyone knows, the Scottish and the Irish people are very direct. We are very brutal and we're very honest in our approach. And I think what's happened is in this day and age, a lot of people need just raw facts and they need transparency. They need people to be honest with them. And that's my approach when I teach. I don't sugarcoat anything. I tell people in my seminars exactly what's happening. And my specialization is from a faith-based perspective. So I understand relationship science, the psychology behind it, but I cup it through Islamic faith-based systems and values. So I merge the two, and then that's what I teach.
You know, when I met you indirectly,
Yes.
And I looked at your website, and alhamdulillah, you know, I must say it is very professionally done.
Thank you.
And I like to believe that we, as South Africans, even the global community, can benefit from it because, you know, our homes today, Qasim, I'm not too sure in terms of what's the global experience, although I also travel as much as you do. In terms, they are very sad places, yet they're supposed to be happy places.
Absolutely.
Yes. To what would you attribute that?
No, I think what you're saying is it's 100% spot on. The reality is that our homes are meant to be our safe havens, our sanctuaries. But the reality is that I have clients from all over the world, and it's the patterns are the same. And even beforehand, when I published my first book, I had to interview over 500 couples just to get the research in to be able to publish the book. And the biggest lesson that I learned from that time was patterns don't lie.
It's true.
Patterns don't lie. And the sad thing is that in our homes now, we have husbands that don't want to go home. They'll rather stay out with their friends, invest more time in their careers, any form of escapism, just not to go home. And the wife's exact same scenario. They actually want to somehow escape from that environment. Why? Because there's no safety now anymore in the home. And who's suffering because of that? Because of toxic relationships, it's our lineage, it's our next generation, it's the children that are suffering. And this is why I get a lot of phone calls from young couples that are just married, and the wife will be on the phone crying her eyes out saying, why is it that my husband doesn't know how to regulate his emotions? Why does he not know how to be vulnerable or express his feelings? And then when I sit with the husband and I do a psychological timeline on him, he'll burst into tears after 1 or 2 sessions. And it all goes back to his upbringing. He's modeling what he's watched his father do, or the daughter's modeling what the mum has done. And this is why we're carrying on this generational trauma. And we need to realize that we really need to start looking inward and looking at ourselves in the way we parent, and understanding that maybe we are parenting and we think that we're doing something in a certain way, But what we might be teaching is what our parents and grandparents taught us, and they might have been traumatized in some things. So we're passing this generational trauma. And just to give you a quick example on that, for instance, I had someone who said that to me, well, a couple came on the phone. I spent some sessions with them, and the reality of the fact was that they were having intimacy issues. And they were both in a position of being just sexually frustrated, and that was leading to further problems in their marriage. And so when I spoke to them, both of them had, interestingly, the exact same problem. They grew up in households where they never saw their mum and dad have any form of sort of like bonding time or expressing feelings of love. I'll give you something basic, not even just sitting there holding hands, praying together. Do you know this kind of little bit of flirtatiousness that husband and wife has in the house? It's almost like that was not shown to them growing up in their culture, from their cultural backgrounds. And these are people that are born and raised in the UK, but whose parents have come from Pakistan or India. And now what's happened is that these kids now have grown up, they have now got married, and they don't know how to, because they're modeling what mum and dad have done. Even one of them was saying that my mum and dad have slept in different rooms for the last 20 years. So this is why they're having intimacy issues. They don't know how to be intimate or express feelings of love and appreciation.
You know, listening to you, you're already moving so fast.
Yes.
Going to the next segment. You know, listening to you, you know, for me, I often interview the sisters here, right?
Yes.
And it is so refreshing to hear a male voice that showing the nuances, the emotional aspects to marriage, which is often missing.
Yes.
What I want to do in the second segment, let's talk about marriage from the get-go, from courtship. Let's follow that pattern and let's look at some of the mistakes that people are making. Alhamdulillah, my beloved viewers, I must say I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I must say sometimes you think you know everything, and I'm learning so much from him. And inshallah, after the program, I said, Qasim, I owe you some dollars, right? Inshallah. We look forward to you coming back immediately after this break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know, in the break, I was just saying a few things to Qasim, right? And alhamdulillah, I can understand why he's so successful when he deals with these dynamics, because the sensitivity he shows, he's authentic, he does a lot of background, a deep understanding. And so alhamdulillah, may my dua for you, may you continue to do the great work that you are doing.
Thank you so much.
So I want to speak about this whole issue of courtship. You know, today, for example, people say to the mom and dad, Daddy, I must marry her. I'm in love.
I'm in love.
There's no one else like her, Daddy. No one else. So the father might ask, what about the family? Okay, Daddy, I'm not marrying the family. I'm marrying her, Daddy.
Exactly.
I love her too much, Daddy. Please, Daddy. Right? So I'm sure you also get those kinds of scenarios, right?
I do. So really the current trend, and like I mentioned before the break, when I published my first book, I just doing a lot of research on couples, both who are married, divorcees as well, just going through the full spectrum. The connection of just, you realize that fundamentally the elephant in the room that nobody really wants to talk about is that it all starts from the courting stage. If you get the courting stage wrong, you have the potential of destroying your marriage very quickly. And that's something that a lot of people don't speak about. And the base reality now here from a faith-based perspective is that the majority of our youngsters and divorcees are falling into a bracket where they've become so desperate to get married, either it's out of loneliness, desperation, low self-worth issues. But what ends up, or another factor is that because of the over-sexualization of things, now that what ends up happening is that as they're going through high school or they're in university, the first person that they meet, they think this is the one. And so what we now need to do is we need to sort of like take a step back and take a deep breath in the way we court, especially as Muslims, from a faith-based perspective, where's things gone wrong. And the way I like to teach it in my classes is that I put it into three sort of segments. There's three groups of Muslims, and you'll fall into one of these three. The first group are the group that will sort of like do things according to cultural or faith-based values. So what they'll do is they'll meet someone, let's just say at university, they like them, they'll go to their families and say, by the way, there's this young man, he's mashallah, he's academic, he's practicing, and vice versa. The brother will say the same for the sister. They'll get the families involved, and they have got enough maturity to understand that as soon as we get the families involved, it doesn't mean that we're getting married. Because a lot of the fear from the kind of the people with lack of life experience, or they're not that mature, is they'll think, if I introduce him or her to my family, that means I'm committed. This first group understand that it's only a safety net, that the family or the wali's getting involved just in the periphery to keep things in check, and they understand that. So they have a dozen meetings. After that dozen meetings, either they say, no, we're not good for each other, or they say, Bismillah, we tick all the boxes, let's get married. That's group one. Group two, that I've realized, what they end up doing is, these are Muslims I'm talking about. If we were talking about non-Muslims, a completely different psychology, yeah? So Muslims now, what will happen is that, let's just use university as an example here. They'll meet each other at university, they like each other, and then they'll say, oh, let's just communicate. Because we're young, we're intelligent, we're practicing, we know our boundaries. Let's just have a little discussion. So that discussion from 1 week goes on to 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, sometimes the entire 3 years of university, or they formed an emotional attachment. Then what ends up happening is that once they formed an emotional attachment, it ends up slipping and leading on to a physical attachment. So it's basically a full-on boyfriend-girlfriend situation, which started off innocent. Sometimes in the cases that I deal with, either they've kissed or if they've taken it to the next level, and then they realize, because they come from grounded background, the families are practicing there, they're in charge of MSAs, but what ends up happening is that they'll slip, make a mistake, and two things happen. Either the sister or the brother will say, we can't continue this anymore, and they part. Or what happens is that they say, no, we've made a mistake, let's make tawbah, astaghfar, and let's do it again, but this time they'll behave more like group one. It's like they'll have boundaries in their courting, and they'll get family involved. So this is sort of like group two. And then there's a group three. Over the years, I've realized, and this is a young couple that they'll meet, and from the word go, it's just intense passion. They break every single faith-based principle. They've transgressed all the bounds. They've deceived, a lot of deception, a lot of lies to the family. Oh, we're away, I'm studying here. I'm going to my friends, I'm traveling here for the weekend, but they're in hotels. There's full-on sexual intimacy going on, everything under the sun. This couple here, group three, this is a couple that I've seen from Muslim communities, that they're the ones that then go to this level of saying, to the parents, it's almost like to the parents and the families, don't cross me. If you cross me, I'll do something worse. I'll run away, I'll do this. And this is a lot of the cases where, I'll give you an example. I dealt with a family, and what happened was a young brother and sister practicing in the community, but they went into group three mode straight away from the beginning. And what happened was that there was no compatibility between the two. But what ended up happening was that the father, just looking at this young 17, 18-year-old daughter of his, with so much compassion, just said, my love, there's no compatibility here. Please take a step back. Just let's discuss this. But she was already emotionally, physically attached to him. So it was like game over by that stage. And this is why I always say, the moment you get emotionally attached to someone, it's game over. Because you cannot identify the red flags or the amber flags in that courting scenario. Because now, the brain, if you study the brain, like brain scans, so you have the prefrontal cortex, you have the hippocampus, you have the amygdala. If you study brain scans with people that are become infatuated or fall in love or have a serious attachment, the same areas of the dopamine receptors highlight like someone that's a drug addict. So the same areas are highlighting as an addict, as a drug addict. Why? because it's an addiction. Love, that's why they say love is an addiction. People become blind in love. In my profession, we know it's not love, it's more a lustful attachment. But the reality is that when you're in that state, you can't see anything. And what ends up happening is that this couple go to the entire community, they speak to their leaders, the imams, the people of knowledge, gather the community against the mother and the father, saying, look at the injustice, we're two young Muslims, we're practicing, we're this, but they're saying no, rather than actually listening to is there personality clash, is there compatibility, doing your due diligence to see, but they were in love, they'd crossed the boundary, so what ended up happening was, he caused all this issue, and then finally the father took a stroke 6 months into the saga. And then the doctors advised him to calm down under stress. Then he gave us permission because his wife said, let it go. So they all basically took a step back, and this is the scary part, and this is what I want all of yours to understand. My observations over years and publishing now, I've just finished off my second book and handed it to my publisher. The most important thing that I've realized is this, that with group 3, probably within 24 to 48 months, it all goes pear-shaped.
Correct, yes.
It leads to a divorce. And it's not just a amicable parting.
No.
They become the worst enemies. And the thing that brings a tear to my eye is when I'm dealing with cases when there's young children involved. A young 1-year-old or 2-year-old or like 2-3 kids in the scene within that 4-year period. This is the most scariest thing. And this example I gave you, what was the example? The father took a stroke, he gave in, 3 years later she divorces. There's a divorce now in the community. They hate each other's guts. So this is group 1, group 2, group 3. Usually in our communities around the world, whether you're in the US, where I am, the United Kingdom, Europe, Australia, Malaysia, South Africa, I'm guaranteed it'll be the same. It'll be the same because patterns don't lie. And this is the reality, is that we now need to teach and educate our youngsters, and not just our youngsters, even the people who are divorcees, to understand their own self-worth. Don't lower your standards out of desperation. Do not, even if you're feeling like for a lot of people, because of the over-sexualization, they're all sexually frustrated. And the first person they see, they're like, I want to get attached, I want to fall in love. And everyone now needs to take a step back and understand there's such a thing as red flags, amber flags, green flags, understanding compatibility, doing your due diligence, asking the right questions when you are in a courting stage. That's the most important thing. And there's so much more I can say, but the reality is that this is one of the pandemics that are going around for the Muslim communities.
You know, whilst you were talking, I was reflecting on some of my own experiences counseling people. Just the other day, I was counseling, this lady. She lost her husband. She had 3 kids, and so she, in inverted commas, fell in love with an individual. And I said to her, you're not even in love. You are infatuated.
Absolutely.
In fact, it's like a drug to you.
Absolutely.
It's such a drug to you that you feel your kids are insensitive towards you. But their concerns are authentic and they're genuine, right? And so, and sadly, I just hope, inshallah, I'm still working on that, that she sees, the right way, inshallah. The whole thing, what is very disturbing, I've seen this as a pattern, that the third group especially, where they become defiant,
Yes, absolutely.
Openly defiant, normally, we, especially with our females, our daughters, they're more obliging and obsequious and, agreeable to their parents. Absolutely. They are being very, very defiant. So my question to you, for the next segment, time is going,
Sure.
right? Alhamdulillah. So my question, I want you to think about this. It's part of what you do, it'll come automatically to you. Sure. What should parents do differently? Do differently. What should they do? They say it's easy to prepare a person for the wedding, but difficult to prepare for the marriage.
Absolutely.
Right. So, alhamdulillah, I won't say there you have it, because my brother reminds me that has become, one of my idiosyncrasies. There you have it. So, okay, Aslam, my brother, one more time. So anyway, alhamdulillah, you are listening to Qasim, Rafique. Alhamdulillah, such an insightful presentation There are so many nuggets, so many words of wisdom, inshallah. And please make dua that he himself one day comes to South Africa on a tour, and I'm going to promote it. We'll be back immediately after this break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My gosh, it was well worth it, my taking a 6:15 flight from Durban this morning. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Qasim, Jazakumullah. If I say some things repeatedly, because I mean it.
I know.
I really, really mean it.
Thank you
because
so much.
I tell you what, and I know when you were speaking at one time, there was tears in your eyes, because the ummah is bleeding. It's really, really bleeding.
Yeah.
So there are parents who watch this program. What kind of advice can you give them to at least ensure, inshallah, that the kind of issues that impacting on many people, it does not reside in their home,
Yeah. I think one of the most important things to understand is that we need to get away from this cultural baggage that a lot of us have. I deal with so many issues, and if you go to the root cause of a lot of the issues, whether it's the children basically marrying who they want and neglecting the parents, it's actually a trauma response. It's because they're rebelling. Why? Because they're now they've got to a point that they feel like they're wanting to escape their lives, and so when they find someone, they find that dopamine rush. They find that sense of fulfillment with them, and then they look, because their parents aren't their friends. It's almost like they've been raised in a way that, okay, we need you to do this. We need you to marry that person. We need you to study that. We want you to become Hafiz of Quran. We want you to become a doctor. And you must marry within our Qabila. And you must, all these rules and regulations. And so what happens is that there's this unhealthy dynamic where a lot of the children grow up and they don't actually have a strong attachment with their parents. They have an avoidant attachment. It's almost like they don't want to. It's the way the parents have attached themselves is like, you do this for us growing up and we will reward you. That's the sort of like transactional relationship. Whereas for a parent, it should be unconditional. It should be that we have unconditional love for you, rather than putting children into a position of shame. Because the difference between, for instance, saying to someone that you're bad, or you've done a bad thing. Nowadays, what parents do, or our cultural parents, what they'll do is they won't say that you've done a bad thing. This is how to rectify it. This is how to fix it. This is how to get yourself back up. They will say, you are bad.
Correct, yes.
So they put shame into the children. And then what ends up happening is that there's a disconnect between the parents and the children. So becoming a Hafiz, becoming well-educated, all these things are beautiful things. But if there's no real sort of like bonding between where the son or the daughter doesn't feel like they can be vulnerable in front of mum and dad, or they can sit down with dad and just pour their heart out, or they can pour their heart out to the mum without being scolded or shame and with this. If they can't do that, then what's going to happen is, when it comes to relationships and marriage, they're going to become defiant. Why? Because now they're older, and it's a trauma response, and it's a form of escapism. So what parents now need to do is they need to reevaluate the way they're raising their children in the home. So now what you need to do is you need to, instead of coming from this cultural sort of like background of, we need to do things in a certain way, you can only do this and this, it needs to be within this box. We now need, as parents, need to take a step back and say, we are on your side. Like, no matter what, I am going to support you in everything. But if let's just say they are doing something that they know it's not going to be correct, have a good, healthy communication with the child where they can feel that the child will not be mocked, he will not be put to shame, that he feels that he can express his vulnerability. And when parents do that and have a household built on that, then what will happen is that when a child gets older, and starts to look for marriage, the moment they'll feel comfortable going to mum and dad and saying, Mum and Dad, I'm not happy with this situation, or I would like you to look into this situation. Why? Because they feel that that you will be on their side through thick and thin. And so what that means then is that the child-parent relationship has got strong roots and a very strong foundation. If it doesn't have that strong foundation and strong roots, what's going to happen is that the child will grow up and any form of escapism, and by the way, this isn't just restricted to marriage. This is why there's a pandemic within our Muslim youth with porn addiction.
Correct, yes.
Why is there so much infidelity in our communities? Why is there so much these forms of escapism? Because the reality is that a lot of even our marriages are done because I actually never wanted to marry this brother or this sister, but it's because my mum and dad basically forced me to marry them. So there's an entire paradigm that we have to change about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So once we get to the grassroots levels and we start looking at these problems and starting to parent efficiently and effectively and starting to use new techniques, understanding child psychology and doing some research. And look, we do research for everything. We want to drive a car, we study. We want to become a doctor, we study. We have to educate ourselves to move up. That means that we have to educate ourselves as parents as well. Do you understand? We can't just take what our cultural traditions have told us or what our parents or grandparents or aunties and uncles have said, because they might have limited knowledge themselves. So we need to look outward now, because the biggest problem that I'm finding is that there's a disconnect between families, parents and their children, and there's no more union. There's actually a disconnect where there's no more love, there's no more, it's almost like as soon as they get old enough, they abandon, they move away. But there's actually deep-rooted psychological reasons for why that's happening.
Okay. There's one more thing I want to talk about regarding this. Do you think that one of the reasons for dysfunctional families is the fact that often men are not expressive about their love? Neither do they demonstrate it. You know, I normally tell people, if you tell me that I love my son, but if your son does not experience that love, that means you don't love him. Because the child must also experience that love. How important is this expression of love between the mother and the father, the father, mother, and the kids?
It's probably one of the most fundamental things that you can do to change the entire dynamic of not just your home, but listen to this, very important, your lineage. A lot of people don't understand. When I say lineage, that's a huge statement. If a child grows up in this day and age in a faith-based home as a Muslim, watching their mum and dad be in love, communicate effectively, they make time, they invest in their marriage. Remember, nowadays we're taught the cultural paradigm, which is this. The hierarchy works like this. In the top of that pyramid is the children. The children come first. The mother and father do tawaf around the children for 20, 30 years. That's like the first, that's the most important thing. After that, it's their careers and status. After that, it's their khandan. In Urdu, we say khandan, meaning their relatives are extended. Then after that, listen to this, it's Allah and His Messenger. After that, it's the marriage. The final thing on the list is the husband-wife relationship. I speak to people, I have so many clients from South Africa, and you want to hear the common trend from South Africans? And I'm sitting in the US having these calls, counseling sessions, and I've got men and women in tears explaining to me their pain. Do you want to know what it is? A husband and wife will say, we haven't been out together as a husband and wife for 8 years. Like simple things. I've never been told by my wife that she respects me. He feels emasculated as a man. A wife will feel like she's got no emotional connection with her husband. Why? Because like you're mentioning, he's never once just sat her down and said, by the way, my love, I want you to know something. I deeply appreciate everything that you do for me, for the kids, what you do in this house. You're also a professor, you're an academic, you have a career, you're a businesswoman, whatever it is, and you're balancing this and you're doing that. I want you to know that I'm in love with you and I respect you for that. When do you find husbands sitting their wives down and speaking like that to them? Do you know when you speak to your wife like that, do you know automatically what happens? She feels safe and secure in her relationships. She feels content. But what ends up happening is, there's a clinical psychologist, his name is Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. He wrote a wonderful book on love and respect. And he said that, in one of his chapters, he said that there's this crazy cycle. And this crazy cycle goes like this, that the wife will stop giving respect to her man, to her husband. And the moment she stops giving respect to her husband, by automatic default, the man puts up a barrier. And he can't give her that emotional connection, that safety, security that she's needing to feel safe and secure in her marriage and her relationship. But why? Because the reality is that she's not feeling safe and secure because he isn't giving her words of affirmation.
Correct, yes.
He's not giving her appreciation. He's not looking at her and making her feel desired. Do you understand? So what ends up happening is they're actually both in this crazy cycle. They can't break out of the cycle.
Jazakumullah, Qasim. I think it's very deep and some beautiful insights.
Yeah.
And I want to just share with you one incident in the next segment.
Sure.
And then I would like you to address the South African community and share with them some takeaways, some key things you'd like them to do, inshallah.
Sure.
So, alhamdulillah, it's a very, very stimulating discussion, and I'm sure you are enjoying it. And I'm listening to him. You know, it's really, for me, inspirational, educational. And inshallah, when I go back, I know my wife loves me. She say, hey, Idris, you are different today. I said, what can I do, man? I met the relationship expert. I'm changed. Assalamu alaikum. We'll be back immediately after this break.